Horsemen is a wannabe 7 that doesn't really get there. The premise is kinda interesting as people start dying in the most gruesome manner. The always busy single father and detective played by Dennis Quaid eventually realizes the serial killer, or killers, use the symbology of the horsemen of the apocalypse to do their murders. Where 7 did the 7 sins, this only has to deal with 4 things: conquest, war, famine and death. A simpler task which unfortunately results in a very simple movie. There's simply not enough you can do with these 4 horsemen since they're part of something much bigger. The murders aren't that special and the way it gets resolved is an even bigger letdown. It's even said in the movie that apocalypse doesn't mean end of the world but that which is uncovered, and this not so little tidbit is something that brings the whole movie down. What should have been epic fizzles into nothingness and you're left with a movie that just decided to quit halfway and not finish. The motives of these serial killers, if you can call them that, are also not very profound and left me indifferent. Jiangzi with her accent is too cute to be scary and doesn't get enough menacing moments to truly be interesting. Same for the other characters, especially Dennis Quaid, who plays the absent dad trope in the most cliché way. Bad absent dads are the boy. Skip this movie. It's not worth watching because it does not go anywhere, much like this review. Drop that. Death on the Nile is the second movie of Kenneth Branagh's adaptation of the famous and fictional Belgian moustache-wearing detective Hercule Poirot. The first movie remade The Murder on the Orient Express, and this one remakes the classic Agatha Christie story Death on the Nile. What happens is that, hold on to your britches, there's a death on the Nile. In Egypt, in fact, there's multiple deaths. Eventually, cause we spend half of this 2-hour movie getting to know the character to give the viewer at least a notion that they are participating in some detective work of themselves. We spend some time with Hercule, whose mustache apparently was an idea by his fiancée to cover up a scar he got from an explosion in Ypres during World War I that went across pretty much his whole face. And find ourselves amidst the high society where we meet our first characters, who are all bland and too pretty to be interesting. Even Gal Gadot and Emma Mackey, who are both beautiful beings, are boring as fuck. Things happen cause they need to happen but nothing really happens. Branagh's Walloon accent is annoying. French and Saunders' inclusion is ridiculous. Russell Brand joins the comedy duo as well for some reason. Then there's Rose You-Know-Nothing Jon Snow Leslie, who I haven't thought of since she got killed in Game of Thrones. Oh, spoilers. Well, fuck that show. It's not worth watching thanks to season 8. Not worth watching, kinda like this movie. It's not a good detective movie. It's not a good mystery flick. It's not a good Poirot. What makes the movie even worse is that it looks fake. Almost every scene looks like a green screen, and especially the ones where they actually did green screen to portray an oversaturated Egypt. It tries to show the golden age of the 20s, but it feels more like an oversaccharined fake version of what they are trying to achieve. Adding all these elements, it just makes this movie a boring slog. A drag from start to finish, trying to surpass what came before and failing. As a Belgian myself, yes, I am one too. I have a little bit of pride for Poirot, and this movie, much like the previous one, doesn't do it justice. Skip this and go watch the 1978 version or the David Suchet version from 2004 instead. I'm definitely going to. Drop that. King of New York brings us the ever-dancing Christopher Walken as Frank White, who just got released from prison to go back to his life of crime as a drug lord and make some changes. He hits up his old crew, which features Lawrence Fishburne when he still was called Larry, Steve Buscemi and others, and decides to put the money he earns from all the dope peddling back into the community. Of course, other, more greedy people don't like this and things start to get heated. Enter the Irish cops, David Caruso and Wesley Snipes, who have had it with criminals getting away with their crimes and decide to take the law into their own hands. What happens during the movie I'll leave for you to see, but it's sufficient to say that it'll be explosive. Consider it a 90s neo-noir flick with all the weird stuff 90s movies had. No bad techno soundtrack thankfully though. Walken is pretty much playing the same character he always plays, does some dancing, does some shooting, and it clashes delightfully with coked-out Lawrence Fishburne and some other very colorful characters. The movie doesn't get a lot of favorable reviews as far as I could see, but I enjoyed it regardless and consider it one of those films you can place confidently in the cult corner. It's over the top and almost a parody were it not for the serious tone that runs through a lot of it. It's a great mafia crime flick about an extravagant drug lord trying to do his thing but being unable to shake his past and his nature. Smash that. A couple of episodes ago I reviewed Bad Girls Dormitory, which was quite the disappointment in my book of scantily clad girls in a dormitory doing mean things to their guards and each other. In comes reform schoolgirls, and this, dear friends, was the movie I was expecting and wanting in the first place. Reformed Schoolgirls tells us the story of Jenny, played by young and hot Linda Carroll, who gets thrown into a reform school where all kinds of mischievous girls walk around in lingerie and bikinis and generally being bitches against each other, cause gangs, ya know. Of course, like in any good exploitation movie, we also have the ugly warden type character played by Patastas Edna, who makes the life of our hot body girls even harder. Reform Schoolgirls is over the top 80s schlock fun. It's amazingly entertaining, and not only because of all the gratuitous nudity that is on display during the film. You will come for these shower scenes, but you will stay for the cast fighting against their oppressors despite their differences. I loved this movie so much it earned itself a place among the keepers next to Malibu Express. Do yourself a favor once again and dive headfirst into this delightfully smutty and well-made prison sexploitation movie with hot chicks and rock and roll, oh yeah. Smash that. Wristcutters. Here's a love story. A guy decides to step out of life, cleans his apartment and cuts his wrists. He suddenly finds himself in purgatory where everyone else also committed suicide in some way or the other. He takes a job and becomes friends with a Russian rocker named Eugene. Trying to make the best of their boring afterlife, they meet a cute girl named Zia who claims she didn't kill herself and wants to talk to management. Together they venture out and all kinds of weird things happen. Will they find the solution to their problems? Is there an escape from the hell, or purgatory, they find themselves in? Will they find love? Find out. Wristcutters is an enjoyable indie road movie with some very endearing characters. Due to being in purgatory, they do not have the capability of smiling, so some of the acting feels a little bit stunted, but it's part of the shtick, you know, and you will accept it when you see all the people who killed themselves in some way or the other, some a little bit less pleasant than the other. Wristcutters is an indie film per sang, and you know what you'll get, but you won't regret it. Smash that. The Yakuza is a mid-70s neo-noir crime movie about retired American detective Harry Kilmer, played by Robert Mitchum, who is requested by his friend to save his kidnapped daughter from a Yakuza gangster. He travels back to Japan, meets with Ken, a former Yakuza himself, in order to solve the situation without violence. Kilmer and Ken relives some of their past, meeting old friends and lovers so many decades later. Cultures, feelings and interest clash, and you don't have to be a genius to know that when you fuck with the Yakuza you're in big trouble. Yakuza is a cult classic, and like many movies like this, it didn't do well at first. This movie, however, is pretty great and scratches that Western versus Japanese itch, dripping it with crime and violence in a delightful neo-noir flick. All the actors are superb, which should surprise no one, and many scenes will have you glued to your screen to see how it will turn out. Because it could turn out badly for anyone, and it does. And it's great, from the first second till the last. Do yourself a favor and watch the Yakuza immediately. Top it off with some Chinatown, some outrage and beyond outrage to get into the Beat Takeshi string of excellent movies about Japanese crime. Smash that. X is a movie about a group of people, 3 girls and 3 guys, who decide to become big in the porn industry and rent a bed and breakfast kind of house in rural Texas. Upon arriving there, however, they are greeted by a strange elderly couple who aren't as nice as they seem to be. What follows is a movie that made me think about Texas Chainsaw Massacre with a sprinkle of sexy time. The movie has the typical southern look with hillbillies, gators and sticky dirty hot air all around. There's boobage and sexy time and even a scene that makes you rethink that boobage and sexy time, making you realize one of the messages of the movie might come for you one day too. And that's sad. Just avoid doing what happens in the movie and you'll be fine though. X is an enjoyable horror movie that imitates the 70s Roadhouse movie style quite well. It doesn't reinvent the wheel and you kinda know what will happen, but even then it doesn't take the easy route like many other movies of this ilk. Some of the kills are pretty lame though, but still, X is one of those movies you can watch with your friends with a couple of beers and popcorn. Probably some chicken wings and guacamole dip, some chili dogs, a margarita or two, big hamburger and a juicy steak. Just watch it before a certain scene and you smash that. Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence is a World War II movie about a bunch of soldiers in a Japanese POW camp. The British officer Mr. Lawrence knows a lot about Japanese culture and is granted a certain degree of respect by his captors. When something happens with a certain prisoner, things start to get more and more tense. It gets even more complicated when Jack Selliers enters the camp, played by none other than David Bowie. He's a rebel and a gentleman but is considered a sort of demon by the Japanese gods. Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence isn't a Christmas movie, but you will know the meaning of the title as soon as this delightful movie ends. With actors such as Tom Conti, David Bowie and one of my favorites, Takeshi Beat Kitano, you can't go wrong. The British upper lip attitude versus the strict Japanese culture is a sight to see, and the subtle injection of homosexual tension and love adds an extra layer to what is happening in this flick. Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence is an excellent World War II movie where the war is being fought between cultures and standards, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. It's not a happy movie, but there's this sense of a feel-good movie in it that you can only get with the typical snarky British stiff upper lip soldiers screwing around with their captives. People who love the still superior Bridge Over River Kwai will certainly enjoy this. Smash that. Fellini's Satyricon is the more well-known movie about Satyricon. There is another movie called Satyricon from the same year made by Gianluigi Pallada, later renamed The Degenerates cause Fellini's Satyricon became more famous. Ironic, since Fellini tried to buy the name Satyricon for his movie but was refused by the other director, hence that this movie is called Fellini's Satyricon. Based on the ancient incomplete Roman texts by Petronius, it tells a bunch of surreal satirical stories during the first age of the Roman Empire when Nero reigned and madness and folly were rampant. Satyricon is the type of movie, much like Caligula, that almost feels like a theatre play. The sets are lavish, the costumes are colourful, and there's something to see in each and every scene. Whether it's two peacocks standing in front of each other while people talk, or a group of men and women lying on top and across from each other in some debaucherous party, Satyricon feels surreal, and more so due to the fact that scenes sometimes just stop. This simply because the texts were incomplete or destroyed over time. Due to this, it's sometimes difficult to follow where it's going, but I would suggest just indulging yourself in the visual and narrative bombardment. The story follows Incolpio, who intends to commit suicide after his lover chose another man. Due to divine intervention, however, he ends up wandering the streets of Rome and gets enthralled into one surreal story after the other. Satyricon, much like Caligula and others like it, show the typical theatrical Rome where sex, violence and all kinds of immoral stuff is happening. It's a dense movie that probably gets better and better with each subsequent viewing. Suffice to say that Fellini's Satyricon is a sight to see and is a classic of cinema. You would be well to see it. Just don't take drugs while you're doing it, I guess. It's a bit long towards the end though, so don't give up. Smash that. Il Conformist, also known as The Conformist, is an Italian movie about a man who becomes a fascist in 1930s Italy. He meets a girl and gets married, and while he is on his honeymoon he is tasked to jill his old professor, a known anti-fascist. What we witness in the movie is said to be a psychological look into the reasons why a person would become a fascist. Our main character, played by Jean-Louis Trintignant, comes from a dysfunctional family, is a bureaucrat and experienced childhood trauma which leads him to become a weak-willed man looking for a sense of belonging that he finds in the strict politics of fascism. As you might be able to deduce from this, our lead isn't the nicest person and he's quite the cold one, but that sense of belonging is part of us all, whether you become a fascist or something else. To me, it wasn't a movie about a fascist per se, but about a man who learns to discover himself over the years and deeds and realizes that what he has lived was mostly a lie to others, but more so, a lie towards himself. Overall, this movie is a very interesting movie with some very nice visuals, but isn't for everyone. It's a very artsy Art Deco movie and, despite being Italian, felt very French. Maybe this is because most of the film plays out in Paris, France, but still, Il Conformist is a classic and generally lauded as a masterpiece. Whether it's your thing or not doesn't really matter. It's something you have to see and experience for yourself. For me, it was an interesting flick, but it didn't do enough for me to make me feel a sense of amazement. I'm spoiled, I know. Check that.